Hey guys, it's Filippo here, the technical brewing lead for Brew FT, and it's brew day. So I'm going to take you through the basics of brewing beer. I'm going to show you the equipment you're going to need, the ingredients we're going to need for today's recipe, and take you through the brewing process. Hope you enjoy. As always, if you have any questions, be sure to reach out. We're happy to help in whatever way we can. And if you feel like you want to try this on your own, please go for it and send us a picture of how it goes. Okay, so equipment that you're going to need. First of all, you're going to need a brew kettle. It could be just any pot, basically. If yours has volume graduations, awesome. Makes it super easy to measure out your water. Ours does not, and that's totally fine. You can get by just using other water measurement devices. That's fine. One thing that's important to note with your kettle is depending on what volume you want to brew, your kettle is going to need to be a little bit bigger, because what happens is when you boil, you lose some of that water. So if you're brewing 4 gallons, you can't use a 4-gallon pot, because by the time you're done your boil, you're going to have much less than 4 gallons of water, or beer actually at that point, I guess. So just make sure that your kettle is bigger than your brew size. We're using a brew in a bag method. It's probably the simplest method to use, and nice and cheap, nice and easy. So for that, you're going to need a brew bag. It's basically just a mesh bag. This one's nice because it has handles on it that you can grab. Makes it easy to pull out. Just show you the mesh. That's basically all it is. It's just a bag with mesh on it. It'll hold the malt inside the bag, but it'll let water and everything strain out through it, so it makes things super easy. You're going to need, as always, some Star San or some other form of sterilizer. Make sure that all your equipment is sterilized and clean. You're going to need a scale, actually, for beer, because you need to weigh out your ingredients. This is just a simple Amazon kitchen scale. As always, for all of our brews, you need a fermenter. You can use a glass carboy like me, or some of them you can use plastic buckets that they sell, and you can basically anything that you've been using up to this point. You're also going to need a rubber stopper and an airlock. Again, this is nothing really new if you've been following us along to this point. And a thing that's nice to have, not totally necessary, is a graduated cylinder and a hydrometer. This is basically going to help you to measure the alcohol content in your beer, and it'll help you with following along through your recipe. Most of them will provide you with an estimated pre-boil gravity, post-boil gravity. So if you have a hydrometer, it helps you to follow along, make sure you're on the right track, and not totally necessary, but definitely helps you out quite a bit. All right, so we're on to the recipe now. Today we're doing probably the simplest beer recipe you can have. It's a smash recipe. That stands for single malt and single hop. So you only have one type of malt and one type of hop. Super easy. Figured it'd be the best way to introduce everybody into their first beer brew. Today we're doing a citrus smash IPA. So it's going to be a little bitter, but hopefully not too much, have a nice aroma to it. And to do that, the ingredients you're going to need for malt, some 2-row pale malt. You can get this at homebrew supply shops. And we're going to need about 3 pounds and 15 ounces, so better to just get a 4-pound bag because they're not going to sell it to you in that exact amount. In terms of hops, we're using citra hops. Really nice aroma, also versatile enough to be used for bittering. We're going to need about 2 ounces of that. You're going to use a little less, but again, they only sell in 1-ounce bags, so that's what you're going to need. In terms of yeast, you have 2 options to go through. You can go through a liquid yeast and a dry yeast. I recommend personally using dry yeast just because it's easy to store and it works pretty well. It's also cheaper than liquid yeast. But today we're going to be using liquid yeast just to show you what that looks like and see if that's something you're into. Then we'll get into the mash. All right, so step 0.5 before step 1 of the mash should have been to make sure that all of your stuff is clean. As always, before you start, you want to make sure everything is cleaned up. The benefits, however, of brewing beer, I should say, is that for your brew pot, you don't necessarily have to make sure it's sterilized. Clean, for sure, you should make sure it's clean, but the perks of brewing beer is that you're going to be boiling for an hour, so it's going to sterilize whatever is in there anyways, so you don't have to worry too much about sterilizing your brew pot, but you want to make sure it's clean, 100%. So step 1 in any beer recipe is going to be your mash. This is going to be putting in your water, bringing that up to, our recipe is around 152 degrees Fahrenheit. bringing that up to temperature and adding your malt. And this process is basically just going to extract all the sugars from the malt and bring it into the water. This will start the brewing process off, and this is where the brew bag comes in. You're going to fill the bag with your malt inside the kettle in the water. So it's basically like steeping tea. You're going to be steeping those malts in the water, and at that temperature it's going to extract all the sugar and all the goodness from the malts. And then once you're done with your mash, which for this recipe it's about an hour long, you can just pull the bag out. All the leftover spent grains is going to be left in there, and whatever's left in your kettle, it's just wort. You just have sugar and water and goodness all left together, and we'll get into that. All right, so now we're in the mash step, and I've realized that there's one more piece of equipment. You can hear the water actually heating up in the background, but there's one more piece of equipment I forgot to mention that you need, and that's going to be a thermometer. That's to make sure that we're hitting our mash temperature, which for this recipe is 152 degrees Fahrenheit. But anyways, we're on to the mash step, and on a brew day, the thing I like to do is get my water measured out, which for this recipe, I don't know if I mentioned it, but is 3.39 gallons of water. I like to get that measured out and put into the kettle first. Gives it a lot of time to heat up, and while it's heating up, I'm shaking. While it's heating up, you can do other stuff. While it's heating up, I'm going to measure out my grains, my malt, which for this recipe is 3 pounds and 15.1 ounces, but that's only about 0.9 ounces away from it just being 4 pounds. And well, I have a 4-pound bag here, so I'm just going to use the whole bag and hope for the best, because that's how homebrewing is. Low stress and hope the stuff works out. But if you do need more exact measurements, you're not just going to throw a bag in. I would take this time to measure out your grains, make sure you have X amount of whatever it is you need while the water's heating up, because this is going to take a little bit of time. But if anybody's wondering how I got 3.39 gallons of water into the pot without any volume graduations, well, this is just kind of shady, but it's the best I could do. I just did 3 1-gallon measurements. Like I used a carboy that's a gallon big, dumped those in, and then the remaining 0.39 gallons is about 1.5 liters. So just dumped the 1.5 liters left in there and hoping for the best. Again, this is homebrewing, low stress, just have fun with it, and we'll be back when it's time for the mash. All right guys, so we're mashing. You can see the temperature here. We've overshot it just a tad. Should be around 152. Right now we're hovering around 155-ish. But that's what it looks like with all the grains inside the water, inside the grain bag. Another thing I forgot to mention is before you toss your grains in, you actually want to overshoot your mash temperature just a little bit, because you're putting cold grains into hot water, so it's going to cool the temperature of the water down a little bit. So I usually like to go around 160 in the water before you put the grains in, then toss the grains in and they drop down. But we overshot it just a little bit, but that's okay. It'll come down. I've turned the heat down. So we come back an hour later, we take the grains out, and we're on to the next step. All right, so the mash is done. It's been at 1 hour at around 152 degrees Fahrenheit. What we're doing right now is the next step, which is called lautering. For us, because we're brewing in a bag, this step is just lifting the bag up and letting the grains drain out. For other methods, it could be a lot more complicated, but because we decided to do the brew in a bag method, this is nice and simple. So our bag actually comes with handles, which makes this a little easier. I've already cranked up the heat, so it's now rising to the boil temperature, so it's going to take a while, but if you start ramping up the temperature now, you save a little bit of time. Now this is going to be pretty hot because it's been sitting at 152 degrees Fahrenheit, so just be careful with your hands. And all you need to do is just lift the bag, let that water drain out from the grains. Don't squeeze the grains. If you do that, you're going to add some bad flavors to your beer, some bitterness and astringency. Once this is done dripping for the most part, I'm just going to set it down on this bucket over here for the remaining little bit of water and whatever is left to drain out. And this is all compostable. I would not throw this out at all. This is organic material, and there are actually recipes out there that you can do like granola bars or bread and stuff with this, so look those up if you're interested. And so you're going to let this drain, ramp up the temperature to the boil, and I'll get back to you then. Alright, so we're up to the boil now. I'll show you the kettle. You can maybe see that it's starting to boil there, and you can get the nice rolling boil going. In our recipe we need 1/4 ounce of citra weighed out, and you put that right at the start of the boil. The way that these are set in recipes usually would be 60 minutes, because it counts down from the start of your boil to the end. So a 0-minute addition would be the end of your boil. 60-minute addition means the very start of your boil. And we are doing a 60-minute boil, and it looks like we're up to that point, so we're going to add our beautiful citra hops. These smell amazing, and we're just going to dump those in here, like so. We'll give it a quick stir after that, and let it boil for an hour. Really important thing to note at this point is anything that touches this, which is now the wort, anything that touches that needs to be completely sterile, because right now we're boiling it, so we're getting rid of all the microorganisms. We're starting from a complete clean slate right now, so anything that touches this in the future needs to be sterilized. Otherwise, we open ourselves up to some contamination problems in the future. But we're boiling, and get back to you after an hour. Okay, so our 60-minute boil is done. We're on to the last step here, which is a whirlpool hop addition. Basically what happens is right now you're at boiling temperature, 200 degrees Fahrenheit roughly. Let it cool down to about 170 degrees Fahrenheit. Stir like crazy inside the kettle. It'll push all of the proteins and everything to the middle. And while you're stirring, add in the hops and keep stirring for about 10 to 15 minutes. What this is going to do is add some more of the aroma from the hops, because we're not boiling it, there's not as high of a heat. So you're going to get mostly aroma, maybe a little bit of bitterness, and hopefully it'll all work out nice. Alright, so we're on to our last step of brew day, which is to cool down your wort and transfer it into some carboys. So cheapest and simplest way of doing this, which is the way I'm doing it, is just stick your brew kettle into a sink, fill that sink with some cold water, and let the cold water cool down your wort. Once it reaches around 20 to 25 degrees Celsius, we're going to transfer it into some clean and sanitized carboys, and then pitch in your yeast and let that ferment away, and you're going to have some pretty good beer, hopefully by the end of it. Alright, as always, if you have any questions, be sure to reach out and we'll be happy to help you. Hope you enjoyed.